Today we're installing the LumaStep M2 power running boards by Boost Auto Parts. We're going to start the install with the front passenger bracket. Here's your holes for the mounting locations. If you have any of these little rubber pieces, just pop those out with an auto trim remove tool. Take the bolt plate and slide this retainer about halfway on it. Install it through this hole right here. Once it's through, you can slide the retainer the rest of the way on. Grab the bracket labeled PF for the passenger front. Take a washer, a lock washer, and then your nut. Your next bolt will go second from the left on the top of the bracket, and then on the bottom you'll have one right here. I don't want to tighten these all the way up because we'll need to make some adjustments. For the rear bracket, take an auto trim remove tool to take out the rubber pieces to reveal the mounting holes. Then align the bracket with the holes on the truck. Take 4 screws, but don't tighten them up yet. On the other side of the mounting bracket, here's where the top bolt goes, and here's where the bottom bolt goes. That wasn't too bad. Just make sure you have your bolts ready to go because those brackets are a little heavy holding them up under the truck. So now I'm going to jump over to the driver's side, get those brackets installed. Now I want to get to the fun part, and that is the wiring. I really want to go ahead and get that out of the way, so I'm going to work on that now and show you exactly where I ran all the wiring. Be sure to disconnect the negative side of the battery. Take a T15 to take loose the screws from the fender well liner. There's 2 cables you'll route down the passenger side. Just grab you a pull stick and some electrical tape and run it down the fender liner. One cable will be the power connection for the motor, and then the other cable will be for the lighting. The cables for the passenger side come down the fender liner and attach to the bracket. You'll have to do the same thing on the driver's side. Route those 2 cables for the power and the lighting controls down through the fender liner. I ran the driver's side cable right here through this little panel. I popped the clips out and was able to route it right down there. And everything ended up right beside the battery. The control module goes right here. And then, like any other normal person, I shoved all the other cables right here in this hole. I then routed the cables behind this reserve tank, and they ended up right here. I took the connection from the motor and routed it up front here and connected it up here and attached tie wraps to it. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't getting in the way of this moving bracket. For the rest of the cables, I was able to tie them right here on the bracket out of the way. You'll notice that the motor bracket already has connections made. You want to disconnect those, and the wires you ran down the fender liner, you want to plug those in, and then the wire that dangles from the bracket, you'll use that to connect to the board. Take the white connector from the driver's side and plug it into the other connector on the passenger side wiring harness. The other cable from that white connection comes all the way to the front passenger headlight. And I highly recommend getting the Easy Connect harness. This will connect in line with your front passenger headlight. On the driver's side, I took loose the connection to the factory headlight and connected the Easy Connect harness. So now I'll take this side of the Easy Connect harness and plug it down into the front headlight. Once you connect the harness to the factory headlight, make sure you press the red tab forward. For this install, I will not be using this cable. This is for an optional rock light accessory. Here's where I ended up installing the positive side of the connections for the boards. In order to gain access through the firewall, under the passenger side dash, there is a factory module you'll need to get out of the way. Unclip the module, unscrew the 2 nuts, and then take the bracket out. Next, you'll want to take the high and low signal wire, run it through the boot right behind the battery in order to go through the firewall into the cab of the truck. Guys, getting through that firewall was a pain. Make sure you have a wire hanger in order to push the wires through the boot. Once you get the wire pulled through the firewall, I routed it this way to the driver's side going behind the console. You'll now want to take loose the OBD2 port connection in order to get to the wires. Take the provided wire tap and plug the high signal into pin 6. With the other wire tap included in the kit, you'll plug in the low signal wire to pin 14. Once you're done with the connections, you can take the OBD2 port, reinstall it back on the truck, and take some tie wraps and make sure all the wiring is securely out of the way. The hardest part of this install is definitely getting through that firewall. Anytime I've ever tried to go through that little boot, it's always a pain. So now we're ready to go ahead and install the boards. I've got all the wiring done, so let's get to that. I've got the negative side of the battery reconnected. Let's open the door just to make sure the bracket deploys. And we have success. So now we can finish installing the boards. Take 4 of the bolts and slide them down this track. If you just barely open the door, the front bracket will deploy, and then you just have to manually pull down the rear bracket. The Boost Auto logo will go towards the front where the wiring connections will be made. Take the board with the bolts installed and put them through the bracket holes. Then take the nuts with a 10mm and slightly tighten them up. Just make sure you can still freely slide it. I've got the boards installed where they want you to install them, and that is pushing them all the way to the back. Well, I'm not really crazy about the look of that because you've got this big gap up front. So what I think I'm gonna do is loosen it up and have this middle piece line up with the seam of the door. I like that much better. You've got a little bit more of a gap back there, and then towards the front it's evenly distributed, and in the middle you've got the pad. Once you get the board adjusted, you'll have to adjust the wiring, and you'll have to use this little piece that holds the wiring in. I suggest taking you a small little hammer and tapping that in, because that was really hard to push in with just your fingers. You'll also have to take the excess cable and pull it back right here, and then you'll have to take this loose in order to make sure you leave a loop just for when you open and close the door. You don't want this wire to get pinched. Let's test that now. So it looks like we've got our adjustments made and we're good to go. I am really glad to have this install done. This has taken all day, and it was not the easiest install, but we got it done. So I'm gonna spend the rest of the night tidying up everything, make sure I'm good, and tomorrow we'll check everything out. Let's go over the features I went with for these running boards. The first feature I went with was the style of flasher, which is called the Switchback. I wanted to match the truck signals, and I wanted to match the tow mirror signal. The startup sequence is a really cool feature I added. It will come on when you first deploy the boards, when you remote start the truck, or if you use the factory remote to unlock the doors. Now, you will not see the startup sequence come on if it's daylight and your truck sensor does not detect that it's nighttime, nor will the LED light come on. The next option I highly recommend, it's the plug and play adapter. That way you don't have to splice into your headlight harness, and it makes your life so much easier during the install. As far as the actual board design, you have the option of just the board or to add a foam pad. Now, I added the red hex pattern hoping that it would match the truck color. It's similar, but it's not exact. The colors they offer are gray, blue, and red. The patterns they offer are basic, hex, or a triangle pattern. I do think if you go with a foam pad, you're probably gonna have to clean it more often. Luckily, they sell some cleaner. It's called Boat Juice. Those are the features I went with, but how do I like them compared to the amp power boards that I used to have on the truck? Well, there's pros and cons. Let's first go over the cons. The installation and getting everything lined up was a little harder on the LumaStep, but I think with that LED functionality, it's definitely worth it. Now, as far as the board widths, the Boost Auto parts are right around 5 inches. The amp power boards are right around 6 inches. I asked my wife if the extra inch seemed to matter, and she said it was okay for this application. So let's move on to the pros. One of the best things with the Boost Auto boards, they give you a tap kit so you don't have to take up your OBD2 port like the amp power boards. I've had to unplug that several times in order to hook up my scanner, so it's really nice to have that port freed up. The next best thing about these boards is that they are completely customizable. Like I said, you can either have the board, you can have foam pads, you can have different colors, different patterns. There's so many options you can choose from when you're building your board. Now, obviously, you don't have to go with the startup sequence, but it's pretty daggum cool, and I highly recommend that. And it's really nice having the LED strip built in down the side. With the amp power boards, you get these little LEDs that you have to drill into the truck to mount them. That's actually why I went with wiring up my underglow, the Op7 underglow I had, to the amp power boards. That way I didn't have to worry about mounting those two little LED lights. Now, don't get me wrong. I think both of these boards are a really great option. I just think it comes down to a personal preference. Once you've had power boards, you just can't go back. It's really one of my favorite upgrades, both of them, that I've ever done on this truck. Well, I appreciate y'all watching this. If you liked it, make sure you hit the thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and do so. Until next time, see y'all.